The Moto G series has long been a great way to get relatively good value for money, and the 2021 Moto G series is no exception to that rule. There are 3 phones in the new series, including the Moto G Power, new Moto G Play, and new Moto G Stylus. I've actually used all of the 3 phones, and you can see my full reviews of the devices using the links in the description. But if you're deciding between the 3 and want a more head-to-head comparison, I've put together this video guide for you. Before we dive in though, it's important to note something. If you can afford it, don't go for a Moto G at all. Instead, buy a Pixel 4a. The Google Pixel 4a offers better performance, a far better camera, and a better software experience than any of the 2021 Moto G phones. And it's only $50 more expensive than the Moto G Stylus. Alternatively, you could jump ship from Android altogether and get an iPhone SE if you want the best performing phone under $400. If, however, your budget is $300, then the Moto G series is worth considering. Here's everything you need to know. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps support my work and I would appreciate that support. First up is design, and there are a few differences to note. All 3 phones have a plastic back, and it can feel a little cheap, though not overly so. They also all have a USB-C port and a headphone jack, which is nice to see on devices in this price range. The overall look of the phones can vary a little. The Moto G Play and Moto G Power look like they're in the same series, thanks to the centered square camera bump on the back. The Moto G Stylus, on the other hand, has a rectangular camera bump, and it's on the top left, which is a little strange and makes the Moto G Stylus look kind of like the odd one out. All 3 phones have a fingerprint sensor, though the placement of that sensor varies a little. On the Moto G Play, you'll get it on the back. However, both the Moto G Power and the Moto G Stylus build their sensors into the power button. The insinuation here is that the sensor in the power button is more premium, considering it's on the more expensive phones. But I actually prefer it on the back. It's a little easier to reach. All of the sensors were fast and accurate though, which is helpful. On the front, the Moto G Power and Moto G Stylus have a hole punch cutout for the front-facing camera, which helps make them look relatively premium. The Moto G Play, on the other hand, has a notch for the front-facing camera. Frankly, it's not really that much of a big deal, and the notch isn't that much more intrusive than the hole punch cutout. The quality of the displays on the phones varies a little. As you might expect, the Moto G Play has the lowest end display. On the Moto G Play, you'll get a 6.5-inch display with a 720p resolution. It does the job, but it's not great. The Moto G Power steps things up to a slightly larger 6.6-inch display, but keeps the 720p resolution, and again, it's fine, but not great. Finally, the Moto G Stylus has a 6.8-inch display with a 1080p resolution, and it looks a lot better, with even sharper text and a better overall experience. Of course, there's one other aspect of the overall design that sets one of these phones apart. The Moto G Stylus has a stylus. The stylus adds a bunch of extra functionality to the Moto G series, allowing you to handwrite text and such with the built-in stylus. It's a little laggy and it's not Bluetooth connected like some other styluses, but it works fine and there are tools built into the software to make the experience better. That said, honestly, most probably will not get much use out of the stylus. The phone doesn't have the handwriting recognition like the Galaxy Note or iPad Pro, and while there are some cool tricks that you can do with this stylus, most of the time it feels like a gimmick that wears off. Another big difference between these phones is their performance. The biggest difference is between the Moto G Play and the Moto G Power, considering the fact that the Moto G Play has a Snapdragon 460 processor, while the Moto G Power has a Snapdragon 662 processor. That's a big change, and the result is that at times the Moto G Play can lag or skip where the Moto G Power doesn't. The Moto G Stylus steps things up even more to a Snapdragon 678, and as a result, it's the best performing phone of the 3. For most, the Moto G Power will do the trick, even for some mobile gaming and moderate multitasking. Benchmark results confirm the performance differences too, but honestly, in day-to-day use, the Moto G Power and Moto G Stylus are more or less the same. And while the Moto G Play's performance isn't great, if all you plan on doing is texting, calling, and some social media, it'll do the job just fine. The amount of storage is different too. Thankfully, all 3 phones have a micro SD card slot, and that's more important than ever in the Moto G Play, which only has 32GB of storage. The Moto G Power has options for either 32GB or 64GB, and the Moto G Stylus has 128GB. Then there's the battery life, and they all have a decent battery life. Both the Moto G Play and Moto G Power have excellent battery, thanks to the fact that they offer massive 5000 mAh batteries. The result is that they should both last at least 2 days of moderate use, and even into the 3rd day. The Moto G Stylus has a smaller 4000 mAh battery, but it's still not bad and should get most through at least a day or more of use. Next up is the camera. Now, let's be clear, none of these phones are great in the camera department. Honestly, the photos produced here here are dull and not all that detailed. But some of the phones in the Moto G series are at least a little more versatile. On the low end, the Moto G Play has a dual camera setup, with one 13 megapixel main camera and one 2 megapixel depth camera. The Moto G Power adds a 2 megapixel macro camera and steps the main camera up to a 48 megapixel sensor with binning tech that makes for an effective output of 12 megapixels. It also has a 2 megapixel depth sensor. Last but not least is the Moto G Stylus, which adds an 8 megapixel ultra-wide camera to the system. Obviously, the Moto G Stylus is the most versatile, thanks to the addition of the ultra-wide camera. That said, disappointingly, none of the phones have a telephoto camera, even though they have macro and depth cameras. I frankly hate these low-quality macro cameras, and they don't make for a better experience. In well-lit environments, all of these phones can capture fine shots. As mentioned, they're not all that detailed or colourful, but they'll do the trick. Things get a whole lot worse in low light, so don't expect to be able to capture solid low light photos. So, when all is said and done, which Moto G phone should you go for? Well, if you're on a tight budget and really can't spend much, the Moto G Play will do perfectly fine. If you can spend a little more cash, then the Moto G Power, with its better battery life and performance, is worth stretching to. Then there's the Moto G Stylus. Now, technically, it's the best of the bunch, but it's also the most expensive. At $300, I would seriously recommend saving up that extra $50 and going for the Google Pixel 4a. It really is a far better phone. If your budget really maxes out at $300, then the Moto G Stylus isn't bad, but don't expect to get all that much out of the Stylus. Thanks so much for watching this video, and again, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if it was helpful to you. You can buy all of these phones using the links in the description. My name is Christian, and I'll see you next time. See ya.